Imagining an alternate history where Oliver Cromwell led the Soviet Union requires blending two very different ideologies, historical contexts, and personalities. Cromwell, a 17th-century English Puritan and military leader, championed republicanism, Protestant religious reform, and a strict moral code, while the Soviet Union, under Lenin and Stalin, was rooted in Marxist-Leninist atheism, industrial socialism, and revolutionary dictatorship. Puritanism and religion. Cromwell was deeply committed to his Puritan faith and saw himself as a servant of God's will. If he led the Soviet Union, it would likely have incorporated a strong religious, moral, and puritanical framework. Unlike the atheistic stance of the real Soviet Union, Cromwell's Soviet state would emphasize Christian, Protestant, values. This version of the USSR might heavily restrict freedoms in areas like art, culture, and personal behavior in the name of morality. Cromwell was known for banning activities like theaters, gambling, and even Christmas celebrations that were seen as frivolous. So, the Soviet Union under Cromwell might impose similar restrictions on unholy or indulgent behaviors, which would drastically alter Soviet culture. A theocratic republic, Cromwell was a republican who opposed monarchy, but also leaned towards authoritarianism during his rule as Lord Protector. While he might establish something resembling a republican framework, in practice, his government would resemble a theocratic dictatorship. A Cromwell-led Soviet Union could be more of a Christian-inspired autocracy than a purely secular dictatorship. Instead of Marxist-Leninist ideology based on class struggle, Cromwell might advocate for a godly commonwealth with a focus on moral and religious purity, while still maintaining centralized control over the state. The structures of Soviet power, such as the secret police, state bureaucracy, and military, would likely remain, but they would operate under a framework of religious morality. A Puritan work ethic meets Soviet collectivism. Cromwell was not an economist in the modern sense, but he believed in a strong work ethic and discipline. In this alternate Soviet Union, the Puritan ethic of hard work, thrift, and piety might combine with Soviet-style collectivism, but with a moralized justification. Instead of class struggle, the narrative could be one of religious duty to work hard for the collective good. Nationalization and central planning might still occur, but with an added emphasis on moral righteousness. Wealth accumulation or personal luxuries would likely be seen as sinful and incompatible with both Christian and socialist values. Religious crusades over revolutionary expansion. Cromwell was a military leader who justified his campaigns through religious zeal. In place of Leninist internationalism or Stalinist imperialism, Cromwell's Soviet Union might pursue military expansion framed as religious crusades to spread Christian republicanism. It is possible that Cromwell's Soviet Union would see itself as a protector of Protestantism, potentially aligning against Catholic nations, Islamic states, or other non-Protestant powers. Cromwell's tendency toward religious wars might still lead to expansionist policies, but they would be driven by religious motives rather than communist ideology. A moralized class struggle. While Cromwell had some populist tendencies, he wasn't necessarily a champion of equality in the way Marxist theory envisioned. The Soviet class struggle would be reimagined as a fight against immorality rather than capitalist exploitation. The bourgeoisie might be replaced by those deemed corrupt, sinful, or ungodly. Social hierarchies could form around religious purity, with the most devout holding positions of power, not unlike how the Communist Party held absolute power in the real Soviet Union. The Inquisition instead of the KGB. Cromwell was no stranger to religious repression, having persecuted Catholics in Ireland. Under his rule, the Soviet Union's secret police and repressive apparatus might focus on rooting out heretics, immoral behavior, and religious dissenters. The concept of state atheism would be replaced by a strict state-enforced Christian moral order. Anyone who opposed this Christian order would be dealt with as harshly as enemies of the Soviet state were under Stalin. limited freedom in arts and education, Cromwell had a history of curbing artistic expression, and in this alternate reality, the Soviet Union state-run culture would also be highly censored and controlled. Music, theater, and literature might be required to promote Christian virtues and discipline, rather than the revolutionary spirit of the people. Science might still be promoted as a tool of state power, but it would need to align with religious values. The deeply secular, atheist scientific institutions of the Soviet Union might be replaced by research aligned with Christian doctrine. Puritan factionalism. Cromwell's rule in England was marked by conflicts even within his own ranks. Various Puritan factions disagreed on how to implement their moral and religious vision. A Soviet Union led by Cromwell could face similar internal struggles, with different religious factions competing for control over the interpretation of Christian law and morality, much like different factions in the Communist Party. Conclusion: a Soviet Union led by Oliver Cromwell would likely be a theocratic authoritarian state, blending elements of Christian moralism with the centralized control of a socialist government. It would be far more religiously focused, with an emphasis on moral purity, discipline, and hard work. While it might still retain some aspects of Soviet economic and political structure, its guiding philosophy would be Protestant Puritanism rather than Marxist-Leninism. The state's enemies would be framed as moral and religious deviants, and the international agenda might revolve around a Christian crusade rather than global communist revolution.